Today we're joined by Jean-Claude Piris. He was the legal counsel of the European Council, and he also spent more than 2 decades as head of the legal service of the EU Council of Ministers, and he has participated in a lot of the important decisions taken over the past 20 years, notably in the adoption of the new treaties in the European Union. Thanks very much, Mr. Piris, for joining us today. I'd like to start by quoting something you had written in November 2011 in the Financial Times. You had written, "It's time to admit that the enlargement of the EU was too rapid. Europe's citizens no longer understand the purpose of the EU. And for all its increased powers, the European Parliament, the supposed repository of democratic legitimacy in Europe, is a relative failure." What I'd like to ask is there something fundamentally wrong with Europe at this point?
You know, this whole European Union adventure is something which is new, has never been made in history. So we are experiencing. And the problems we have with the currency, I'm sure we are going to talk about that, is another example of that. But European Parliament also, we thought in the beginning we had delegations of national parliaments coming to Brussels to bring democratic legitimacy. And we thought that making all members of European Parliament directly elected by people will bring more democratic legitimacy. It worked, but not 100%. For example, the turnout to the elections has been decreasing a lot. So that's one of the problems we are experiencing with this new adventure, as I said.
Well, then again, there's the question of sovereignty, where individual member states feel like they're just giving up more powers to Brussels.
These states, members of the European Union, a lot of them are old nation states with a lot of history, culture, civilization behind them. So it's difficult for these states, Spain, where you could take Greece, Spain, Portugal, and so on, or France, difficult to abandon or to share, properly said, to share their powers with others. But it's also a necessity, I think, in the modern world. First of all, we have built the European Union in order to have peace between us, because we have been fighting wars all the time during history. And then we have decided to try to have more prosperity together, to build an internal market among all of us, which is 500 million consumers. And then other policies.
But that's the argument always presented by the EU, this notion of there being no wars, it being more peaceful. But if we look at the situation, the economic and social situation of individual member states, this isn't exactly a conducive or a recipe for peace, is it?
Well, if I may, I totally disagree with you. The EU as such cannot make any decision. That's the member states. So if you have the EU, you said, yeah, that's the story of the EU. No, it's the story of the member states. No member state would remain in the EU if it was not in its interest to stay in it. And they are there, these states, because they think that the European Union is helping. If not, they will leave. Simply saying, European Union is a creation of the states.
Well, then, are you worried about the growing social unrest in individual countries, as well as the rise of the extreme political left and right?
Of course. I am worried. It is why since 1 year, 1 year and a half, I am trying to give to give a little bit grain of sand to the discussions and to try to accelerate the way we are taking decisions in order to finish with the euro crisis. Because we cannot go on in some countries with austerity and not giving hope to the people. It is not possible, just not possible. The people are desperate. Their revenues are falling, unemployment is increasing, and so on and so forth. And we have a heavy price paid to populist political parties because of that. And you have these reactions of people in the streets, which are completely understandable. They have no hope at all. So I think we have to give hope to these people and to take decisions visible, credible, understandable as soon as possible. And now it's obvious that we cannot go on with a simple pact, that we need strong rules legally binding rules for the member states to behave and to have a lot of convergence of their budgetary and economic policies in order to establish a real EMU, economic and monetary union.
But you've already had these rules before in the EU. You've just added new rules, and those old rules didn't really help, did they?
No, we did not have these rules. We did not say that every national budget you are going to make, we are going to say yes or no before you are going to be able to accept it. We have not said before taking any economic policies of importance, you must discuss and have the green light of your companions in the common currency. That's all the work we have to do now, and the work which has begun 2 years ago and which is well advanced now. Not enough. We should go much further.
But it's precisely these words, isn't it, of control, of getting more powers from individual member states that is creating this resistance from those countries.
It is a control by your companions. You are in the same boat. You are alpinists, a team of alpinists, of climbers of a mountain linked together by ropes. You are in the same boat rowing. If one is failing, the others will fail probably. It's a team. So you are sharing the powers, we are deciding together, and no one should be the weakest link which might bring a catastrophe.
How long will people have to bear the brunt of the consequences of the euro crisis that we're in?
I do think that now the time has come to take the final decisions. And that's a question for me of weeks, of months, not of years.
I'd like to bring up a question that's being thrown around by some analysts and observers. It's, do you really need the euro to pursue this European project?
This is not the question. We have the euro. This question was 20 years ago. It has been solved by people, governments, parliaments, and so on.
There are those who are still
they have chosen the currency. So now we have the currency. And what would happen if the euro exploded? That would be a catastrophe, total catastrophe. Not only for Greece, Portugal, and so on, but the country which has been benefiting from the euro most is probably Germany. And that would be a catastrophe for Germany. If you look at their trade, again, of course they do a lot of trade with China, but if you look in the global picture, China is a tiny part of their external trade. Most of the trade is done with Europe. What do they do if they, if the euro exploded, what would be the consequence? Some currencies, new currencies, will devaluate, and there will be a war of devaluations, and there will be a great danger for internal market, and there will be a great danger for the European Union as such, European integration. Do you think that members of the government, of the Merkel government, the Hollande government, and so on, will take the responsibility to go towards this route? I don't think so.
Now, one of the pillars of the EU is this free movement of people, no internal borders, but there have been a lot of talk about strengthening border controls and also a rise in anti-immigration rhetoric. Where does that leave Europe?
First, we have this freedom of movement, but actually the number of workers going from one country to another is unfortunately quite weak. You have example because of the language mainly, and also the attachment to people to their regions. So we have to take all decisions we can to improve the mobility of labor within the Union. And I'm proposing some measures in my book on this thing. Another thing is immigration from third countries. You know what are the demographic trends in the countries of the European Union? They are just catastrophic, such as in Russia, such as in other countries as well. That means that we have more older people and less younger people to support them. So we will need immigration from other countries as well, and we have to prepare people to that, and we have, I think, to have a common policy in European countries to prepare that.
Okay, I'd like to bring up defense and military spending, in particular with regard to Syria. Now, Francois Hollande has also said that a military intervention is not off the table in the context of the UN Security Council. However, when France does that, when it's ready to spend on a military intervention, given the dismal finances of the EU, many members of the European Union, how broad would the impact be on the whole economy?
Well, I don't think, Libya was one thing, Syria is another thing. It's much more disturbing, the bigger country and so on and so forth, and I don't see an intervention of EU as such in Syria. Would we have the means to do that? I doubt it also, because of the economic crisis. Our spending in military expenses have decreased a lot in all European countries, and Libya has shown that we have difficulties to have big operations outside of our territory.
Jean-Claude Piris, thanks very much for this interview.